Bodie,
Here.
Carberry Montgomery,
Here.
Kroll,
Here.
Rosendahl,
Here.
and McBurney.
Here.
Thank you.
Yep, he's done. All right, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Kroll, second by Bodie, discussion, roll call.
Kroll,
Yes.
Bodie,
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery,
Yes.
McBurney,
Yes.
Rosendahl.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we will start then with item 3.1, and that's to discuss the fire department accreditation. And AJ, are you gonna kick it off, or is Chief
Well,
on
I
your
think-
choice?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I've asked for the time here because we are dangerously close to receiving accreditation from the fire department, and I thought it'd be appropriate. I know that there was some discussion during your budget review process, but I think it is appropriate as we're at that nearing the finish line that Chief Cardwell provide you an update through the accreditation process, kind of an abbreviated version of the journey that it took to get here and what it means for the department. So with that, Chief, if you would, please.
Yeah, so Mayor, members of council, appreciate the opportunity today. On August 5th, a team from Urbandale will be heading to Atlanta to actually go through our accreditation hearing, which is the final step in the accreditation process, which for us has been a not insignificant journey. Just a little bit about accreditation and how it differs from what you're probably more familiar with, which is the police department's CALEA accreditation. There are only 319 accredited agencies, fire accredited agencies around the world. There are only 224 communities in the United States that are actually accredited. We will be the 7th accredited agency in Iowa. So it's a pretty rare crowd to be a part of being accredited, and to have police and fire both be accredited is a real testament to the community. Fire accreditation is handled through a group called the Center for Public Safety Excellence, or CPSE, and they do accreditation and counseling for their fire officials, so inspectors, instructors, fire chiefs, and fire officers. Both require a pretty significant commitment to meeting national standards of excellence. In that respect, it's very common or very similar to CALEA. Both CALEA and the CPSC rely on a significant commitment to data and transparency. So there's a lot of information that has to be gathered and analyzed as part of the process. Both of them rely on a peer review. You have to submit annual reports, which get reviewed by a team. And then every few years, in our case, it's every 5 years, a peer review team will come back and validate our data, validate the reports that we've been submitting, and check on our progress, which is a big part of really what differs between CALEA and the accreditation for the fire department. CALEA is much more of a risk management tool. Their goal is to provide best practices more for protecting communities and law enforcement. Our process is much more of a planning tool. It's about looking at what you do and how you respond and how you can improve what you're doing going forward, improving the service that you deliver to the community. And all of our tools are kind of based around that part of it. So what does the process look like? Our process actually began in 2018 when you become a registered agency. That's where they ask you to look at what you're doing and compare it to the national standards and decide if this is something you really want to commit to, because it is a significant commitment from the agency in terms of time and effort and things that you're going to have to do as you move forward. We moved to applicant agency, which is where you actually say, yep, we want to do this. We moved to that in July of 2020, so 4 years ago. Our process has been different than most agencies because during that time, we've lost 2 accreditation managers. And the accreditation manager is the person who is responsible for guiding your agency through the process. First with Chief Lyon leaving us and going over to become Chief of Iowa City, and then with the retirement of Chief Holt last summer. So we've had 2 of our accreditation managers actually leave the agency, which meant that we kind of had to keep picking up the pieces as we moved it forward. Fortunately, we had a great peer team that was willing to work with us through the fall, and we've had several members of our organization that really stepped up and said they were willing to do the extra work to get us here. So I want to give kudos to our Battalion Chief, Mike Gentosi, who will be taking over from me as the accreditation manager, but also helped guide us through the process. Assistant Chief Bingham, who we hired 3 months ago, actually comes to us from West Des Moines, who was their accreditation manager. So while he wasn't heavily involved in our process, he'll be heavily involved going forward. And then Battalion Chief Manser, who stepped up in something we've never had before, which is called a data team. And we needed a team just to go through all the data process and go through the screening. So that got us to the final stages, which is where we're close to now, which is a candidate agency. That's when the peer team looks over all your documents, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Then they come visit us for 3 days and meet with everybody. They talked about finance processes, HR processes, management processes. They met with our water department, our fleet department, the Westcom Communications. They really look at all the different aspects of how we operate as a fire department and see whether or not we're on the road towards meeting national standards and best practices. And the big part of that is looking at how we collect and manage our data. There's 3 documents, if you will, that they really like to focus on, that we have to be able to show that we're meeting those national standards. The first one is our strategic plan, which was originally adopted back in 2017, and you recently adopted in February of 2023. That's what our program is going to look like going forward into the future. The next document they really look at is what's called our standards of cover, and that's where they really get into the data. They want to know how long it takes us to handle a call, how long it takes us to get out the door, how long it takes us to drive to an incident. Are our stations located where they need to be? What are our areas? What are the risks to the community? And they want all of that in a data analysis form. That's the one document that they say pretty much has to be in their format, and it's very particular about how they do it. I will tell you, Urbandale is sort of challenged in that way because we rely on closest unit response. So that made our ability to gather data a little bit more tricky. It's something that they're not really too familiar with utilizing, so we kind of had to work through some different methodologies, but we were able to overcome all of that, which was really good. And then the third part is the self-assessment manual. This is where they literally take your department and say, how are you doing everything? And there's 250 different areas that we had to write to and investigate and analyze. And we had to get all of those updated. 90 of those 250 are what they call core competencies, which is if you're not doing it, then you can't be accredited. So we had to look at all those different criteria, write basically a book about all those different things. Then they came in, looked at where we are and how we're doing. They gave us a probationary or a tentative recommendation. We had to clean up some things in that data that I talked about earlier. And we've now made it to the step where we've been recommended for accreditation. So where do we go from here? So we go to Atlanta. And in Atlanta, they're going to ask for our progress on the recommendations that they wrote in the report. When the team that was here in February looked at what we did, they had 19 recommendations, which is not unusual for a first-time agency, and said, here are things that you need to be working on. So they gave us that list. We've gone over the list and identified of the 19, 4 of them are high priority. The rest of them are medium or low priority. But when we go in Atlanta, that's what they're going to ask us about. How are we doing in terms of meeting those recommendations? Have we started working on them? Have we started planning for them? Have we started figuring that out? So as long as we can show the board in August that we've started making progress on those, which we already have, then they will likely recommend that we be accredited. They'll take the vote, and then we move on from there. What does this mean for us going forward? Like the police department now, one of the big things they're about is it's about data, and it's about using data effectively. I like to tell our guys, we don't need to be data-driven, we need to be information-driven, because in order for data to be effective, it has to be scrubbed, which means does it actually measure what you're saying it's going to do? We have to measure it against the defined outcome that says this is what we think it's going to do. Does the data actually reflect that? And then we have to make sure we share it with everybody. Transparency is a big part of the CALEA process, but it's also a big part of our process, which is telling the public and our citizens what it is that we intend to do, and then we show them how we're doing it so we can present it in a way that they can understand. One of the things I've heard about data is that it's only useful if it's visual so that people can actually see it and understand it, and not just table after table of information or data. It needs to actually be presented in a meaningful way. And that's what we've had to do here in the department, is go through all the different services that we provide and figure all those pieces out. So what are the outcomes that we're going to need? What are the data points that we're going to need to measure? And then how can we demonstrate it? Beyond just getting out the door fast, there's a number of different aspects of the department that we need to pay attention to: financial purposes, HR, staffing, training. Are we meeting the requirements for safety? All of those different aspects that accreditation wants us to look at, we're going back and creating outcomes and expectations that we can focus on. There are two areas in the recommendations that they've said we need to pay attention to with regard to what our staffing is for the future, and those are prevention and community risk. We're understaffed in the prevention area. We've been focusing here on our growth over the past several years, and the council has been very gracious in giving us the resources that we need to staff out our fire stations so that we can make all the different calls and the rapid growth that we've had in terms of emergencies. But we need to pay some attention to prevention, and adding a prevention specialist to support Fire Marshal Rec is something that we'll definitely be looking at and making a recommendation for. And then the other one, which is something that council has identified that they really want us to focus on, which is community risk. Looking at our at-risk communities and groups within the city and saying, how can we better connect those to the social agencies and organizations that are available within the community, within the county, and that type of thing. And that's something we talked about earlier, that the fire department, because we are out there on a regular basis working with these groups, meeting these patients on individual calls, we can serve as a conduit or a pipeline. And then this position, or that we're forming the community risk team, will help put together programs to really connect those two pieces together, to connect the need to the resources that the county has available. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth in the future that it's going to allow us to develop our service profiles so that we can do a better job of meeting the needs of the community beyond our core mission, which will always be the emergency response. So that's what it's going to look like going forward. Just a quick synopsis, and I'd be happy to answer any questions for you.
Hey, Chief, just out of curiosity, what were those 4 high priority items that they wanted us to work on?
So the 4 highest priorities that we did have, we need to conduct a staffing analysis with regard to inspections and prevention. We need to allocate our staffing in terms of making sure we know who all of our responsibilities are. That's the service area reassignment that we've been working on. We need to reevaluate community risk assessment with regard to rescue, and then community risk assessment with regard to at-risk groups within the community. So those are the high priority ones that we need to be focusing on.
All right, thanks, Chief. I appreciate that.
If I may, I'd like to, again, put a plug in here that, as the chief mentioned, there's 200 plus in the United States that are accredited for fire. And if you think about 948 cities in the state of Iowa alone, and what that 200 represents, and those 948 from the smallest to the largest, all have some type of fire response, whether it's volunteer professional combined, or a professional department, where they're depending upon each other as a coexistence, as one community providing the service to another. But having said that, I really, don't want to gloss over the fact that, this is an accreditation process. And that's why I wanted to have the chief preview up to date on it, because, again, this is really something, as the mayor and I sat through the police reaccreditation program last week, it's one of those things that, as we work toward this, and I'm fully confident that we'll receive this accreditation, we'll have a police department that is accredited, that holds itself to the highest standards. We'll have a fire department that's accredited, that holds itself to the highest standards of delivery of service. And quite honestly, if some of you didn't know, the library is accredited. So we have 3 accredited departments within the city, which I think is really quite well bodes well for our community. So just wanted to put that shameless plug in for them.
I would love to see that shameless plug broadcast out through our social media channels and newsletters, et cetera, at the appropriate time.
No, I think it's a great idea. I mean, this is a message that, again, you're always looking for value. Our citizens are, and that's one of the things we always get out there. And I know the economic development world and a number of you have spoken, and the mayor has spoken about the value that our residents get for the tax dollars that they pay, and that it's a high value proposition, we like to call it. And so for this is that when we can demonstrate a high level of competency and a high level of professionalism, that our residents can feel confident that when they have to call 911, whether it's on the fire EMS side or it's on the police side, that they're going to get a highly trained, highly motivated group. And again, this is just maybe a message the chief can take to the CALEA or to the accreditation folks. Closest unit response, quite honestly, is really that enhancement of that service level. And I hope they develop a criteria for that, because that would be, I think, something that other communities should be doing as well. But again, I'll be quiet. But I would agree with you, Bridget, that this is quite a message to get out to our community.
Is this something that supports or has been shown to support recruitment efforts too, in terms of staffing?
In terms of, are people going to come to work here because we're accredited? No. But the processes that we put in place with regard especially to engaging our employees using the Teams method is really something that potential and future employees have said that they are interested in, because we're giving our employees a say in some of the most high-level things within the organization, like our EMS protocols and working on our health and safety programs. So the fact that they have a say is very important. That's something that the accreditation process encourages.
Excellent, thanks.
All right. Anything further with regard to accreditation? Any other questions for the chief? All right. Well, we're looking forward to this, chief. Thanks for all the hard work from the department on this. And we look forward to getting this across the goal line. And then we will move on to item 3.2, which is to consider the Polk County funding agreement for the relocation services. AJ, is Curtis going to handle this, or me?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Curtis asked for this to be placed on the agenda for kind of a finalization of the process that you all agreed to assist in relocation efforts as the Relax Motel undergoes its renovation for both market and workforce housing-related housing. So with that, I turn it over to Curtis.
Great. Thank you, AJ. Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I'm sorry my camera is not working on this web-based application, so I'll just talk it through. You received the email yesterday afternoon with the background information. Just a little bit of context here. So this relates to the relocation at 7625 Hickman, formerly the Motel Relax. And when we were looking at these relocation services, we anticipated through Primary Healthcare's original estimate that it could be over $200,000. So we prepared for that and then touched base with our Polk County supervisor and had the indication that we would be able to get up to 50% support on that relocation from the county. Well, the work is done. Our agreement with Primary Healthcare has officially ended. All the tenants have been relocated, and I will say, incidentally, they are rapidly underway on demolition of all the interior of the buildings, and we're working on the final steps to issuance of a building permit. So just an update on the project. But going back to the relocation, in the end, we anticipated that there could be around 55 occupants of the motel that needed to find a new place to live. In the end, after really word got around that the motel would be closing down, by the time Primary Healthcare and their staff, and I'll just say here, they did an absolutely phenomenal job in partnering with us, thoroughly professional in every way. But by the time they went out, there were, just over 24 or so people. And then when they got into the case management, they were really only working with around 20 people. They divided those folks into tier 1, 2, and 3 in terms of complexity of their cases. And so tier 1, decent rental history, fairly solid income. They were able to help those folks find a new place to live. Tier 3 might have been those more complicated tenants, perhaps a spotty tenant history, perhaps a criminal record, things like that that just complicate getting a deposit and getting a successful application to a new place. So those required more case management for those folks. In the end, they were able to take care of all of this by, let's see, this is June, so it was early May when the last folks were able to find a new place to live. Some of the people, as I mentioned, just left right away of their own accord, found that other spot or went back home or wherever it might have been. Others found apartments to live in. Some others went to similar places, motels like Motel Relax around the metro. But in the end, we are able to do all this work. So that includes the hourly rate for case management as well as the direct assistance. So direct assistance might have been paying first and last month's rent. It might have been paying to move somebody to another place. It might have been an application fee and all kinds of miscellaneous expenses in between. In the end, all of that work was done for just under $47,000. And so we are preparing an invoice to Polk County for $23,338.84. And like we do when we do our hotel motel applications and funding awards, we need to get into a 2080 agreement basically that states that public purpose. That is what Polk County has asked for, and since it's an official agreement, we needed to bring it to the council today, and that is what is before you. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you got them.
All right, thanks, Curtis.
You bet.
Any questions?
Yeah, I was curious about, and one of my questions was, what was our feedback on their work? So thanks for answering that before I ask it.
Definitely.
I was curious about the breakdown of the tiers that they identified. Do we know how many folks were in tier 1, 2, and 3 based on, and is that just the folks that they engaged, like the 24 folks that they engaged with, or the 50-some estimated?
Yeah, so we estimated, so the motel had just over 60 units. Initially, occupancy was fairly strong. So when we were looking at all of this late in 23, we anticipated, gosh, we might be dealing with nearly 60 people. In the end, by early January, once we had signed our development agreement and their work got underway, that's when we were down to around a couple dozen people. Councilmember Rosendahl, as far as the breakdown of tiers, I'd need to go back into the spreadsheets that we traded over those months or ask Primary Healthcare. I can sure do that and see if they can do it quickly, and I will send those results back out.
Sweet, thank you.
Yep.
I've got a question. So the money that we had allocated, which was way more than we're ending up spending, that was from our ARPA funds, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
So how much are we either sending back or not spending that we had said we were going to spend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if we looked at it really roughly, if we had thought it was just over 200,000 and we're ending spending up just under 50,000, let's say we saved 150,000.
Okay.
I will say it's not, with our ARPA funding, we generally put it into large categories of property acquisition, affordable housing. So I think it's easier to think of it as that is ARPA capacity that we ended up not using. So it still remains there available. Even our project, our development agreement with MWF, who's redeveloping the site, we said we'd go up to approximately 1.65 million to support the project in that neighborhood. That's an up to amount. And so if the construction ends up costing less, that's just more capacity that will be there in our ARPA.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Anything further? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second, any further discussion? Roll call?
Rosendahl,
Yes.
McBurney,
Yes.
Bodie,
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery,
Yes.
Kroll, excellent.
Amy vote? Amy, did you vote? I didn't hear you. Oh, you're muted. Okay. I see you mouthing yes. Okay. Got it. All right.
Yes.
Thank you. I just didn't hear it. That's all. I was waiting for that verbal yes. All right. Item 3.3 is to continue the discussion regarding nonprofit building permit fees. AJ?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, thank you again for this opportunity to review this material with you. As we discussed at your last council meeting, and unfortunately I was online, so I wasn't there in person to discuss this with you, but I think the message that myself and staff members, particularly Steve Franklin, delivered was that for a number of years, and with the material we had provided previously to you in that memo format, for a number of years, the city of Urbandale has providing waiving for building permit fees for not-for-profit, for public, and for other tax-exempt organizations when they build buildings. Has been demonstrated, and again, I think Steve did a very nice job of highlighting very specific projects that have happened in the recent building history of the dollar amounts that have been waived or not collected from those agencies. As I mentioned again previously when we discussed this last week, was that as we looked back at this, and particularly during our budget review process, and we started looking at the changes that House File 718 initiated with cities, is we started looking at areas where, where is it that we have control over our own economic future, if you will, to raise funds. And this is one that came up. It had been mentioned before at the staff level a couple of times about, I'm not really quite sure why we're doing this. Does anybody can remember? And we all kind of talked back and forth, the existing staff. It really came back to a point of no one really could pinpoint that point in time or any specific council action that said, yes, in fact, this is an authorized action for the city staff to implement when it comes to waiving fees. Also, if you'll recall, in the information we provided, it did show you that the city of Urbandale is the most generous of the cities in the metro, excluding the city of Norwalk, which does provide a waiver for public activities. So as my memo to you indicated, and my recommendation still stands, is that the council position itself through action to formally indicate that they are going to, becoming July 1st, indicate that they are going to take action to officially receive fees from all entities that we provide building services from. And again, a recap of my comments from last week, and more specifically, is that when you look at your property taxes, and we've talked about this before, is that your property taxes pay for city services whether you use them or not. And hopefully for the ones that we pay predominance on, public safety, that you never have a chance to use them. But with building permit fees, when our inspectors are called upon to make an inspection, regardless of whether it's a private, not-for-profit, or a public or a profit entity, that we're actually out there, boots on the ground, providing inspection services. And again, depending upon the size and the complexity of the project, we spend quite a bit of time with a number of different types of inspections. We also mentioned that we do not provide structural inspections. We contract that out. So there is a direct cost to the city. So my point being is that this is a direct cost of service to those who specifically receive that service. And so as we looked at, and again, the number that was developed by the folks in Community Development and Finance, that since January 1st, 2019, approximately $614,000 in building permits have been waived. And again, not looking to the future, I can't tell you that there's another $600 or $700 or $500,000 sitting out there in fees to collect, but at the same time, we're at that kind of crossroads of decision making when we're looking at how we control that economic destiny of the city, and this is just one component of it. Also, I'd like to think of it as a fairness or an equity issue, is that, you know, when a private homeowner has a permit, when a private business has a permit, we provide a service and they pay for it. Again, when you look at the other public or not-for-profit entities, when they're in the position to build, to renovate, to be in a position where they have to take a building permit out, they account for all the other services they provide within that scope of work. Engineering, construction, architectural, maybe legal. And in the case of public entities, if they're going out for bond approval, you have an election, you have bond counsel, you have all the things that we experience as a city when we issue debt. That is a cost of doing business, if you will, when it comes to that. So again, I wanted to bring that back up, give you a chance to kind of digest all the information we had. Also, as you recall, in the weekly update, I wanted to follow up on a question from Councilmember Rosendahl when he asked about the interest possibility, desirability of creating some type of appeal process. As appealing as an appeal process is, I would recommend that you not do so. And for the very simple reason of that we still provide those services. And that, you know, coming up with the criteria is that, for what criteria? Is it a public entity? You know, the argument could be made, well, these are public dollars being spent for a project. Well, we have that same argument. We're spending public dollars on providing that service and not having that been recovered. If it's not for profit, again, we're providing a service. So it's not as if they're not receiving something for what we would be charging them. And I think it's a matter of fairness and equity. Also, I think at some point there's a level of subjectivity that could be incorporated that may be brought into question if one group receives a fairer shake than another group. Again, I'm not saying that would happen, but there's always that possibility. And as all of you are now veterans of dealing with the public venue, you also understand that there's no shortage of people who would make criticism of a council decision that might favor one group over another. So in my experience, I would tell you that I would recommend strongly that you not have an appeal process, that you treat everybody equally and fairly, and that way it is very easy to implement and very easy for staff on behalf of council to make sure it gets applied equally across the board. So with that, I will be quiet and we can answer any more questions that you have about this. If there is a reason to take this forward, well, we will incorporate that in a future council action to make that very clear that as of, for example, July 1st, 2024, the city's policy is that we will collect fees on all building permits issued by the city.
I have absolutely no problem with the policy as you have outlined it. It makes a lot of sense to put it on paper, so to speak, and I have no problem. So I'd be happy to make a motion unless other folks have other opinions.
I don't
Or
think
are we
we
making
can put
motions?
an action item for tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. No, this would
Sorry.
be for the next council meeting.
Yeah,
Yep.
I got no problems.
And I can just, sorry, Pat, you go ahead.
That's all right. I just had a quick question about our own city projects. Is it going to apply then? Are we going to be doing some sort of transfer of funds or something like that? That was one piece I was a little unclear on all along.
Yes, we would incorporate that. We try to apply our standards equally. For example, and Steve can comment on this, when we have sign permits, when we have events, we make sure that we make sure that our departments get a permit to place a sign for events that we have, National Night Out, Party in the Park, those type of things. So, we kind of hold ourselves to the same standard.
Thanks.
One, appreciate the appeal pun. Two, I guess that appeal conversation, the points you made make sense. So I think that's a fair course of action to not have an appeal process. If this were adopted, where specifically does this get recorded, just so that we have, like, that way we've got it written and just point exactly to it so we don't get into this situation later?
I'll discuss that with staff, but I'll ask either Nikki or Nicole to join in. I think that might be incorporated into the overall, some financial policies for the city. I don't know. Nikki, would you think that would fit there as kind of the keeper of that document?
Yeah, I think that we can either roll it into our financial policies. That's wherever it becomes piece of that, because it's effectively a building policy. So yeah, we'll figure out a place to put it, but it would probably be just with our financial policies for now.
Alternatively, does it even need to be incorporated, because we found that there is no documentation that supported it to begin with? Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Correct, but anytime we have an official policy, we'd like to actually put it in writing on something like that, so you have some documentation to point to as this is our policy on this. It was previously undocumented, which is why there was some inconsistency or not knowing exactly what the parameters are. So we would still probably document it in a policy in the same way we do travel or any, whistleblower, all those types of policies that we've got. We just identify it.
And we could just add it to the new fine and fee schedule too, would be an easy way to get it documented.
Yeah, it could be referenced there as well.
Yeah. And more importantly, Steve and his folks would know that once adopted by council, this becomes part of their operational manual, if you will, that they know that there is no exclusion. They don't have to make that inquiry or make that determination whether it's exempt or not. It comes across and they go through their standard process of review and assessment of that fee.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Hey, AJ, when would this take effect? And do we have anything that's outstanding that would be impacted by it?
We would look at July 1st, making that impact. I would defer to Steve, but I'm not aware of any particular project out there from the public venue. We know that we have, like, Waterford School is nearing completion, will open in fall, and so their permits have already been processed. The two schools in Urbandale recently built, Valerius and Olmsted. They are operational and open, so that would not be retroactive. And again, I'm not aware of any other tax exempt property. I don't know, Steve, if you guys have anything in the hopper now, but it would be moving forward from July 1st. So I look at, for example, as we look at any new public safety facility, whether it be fire or police, we would incorporate those fees there. It would be anything else that we've had discussion on, but actually we've not actually received a permit on. So I would defer to Steve, but I'm not aware of anything significant out there. Steve, are you?
Well, the only two that I can think of, the food pantry obviously has asked the question, and then the other one that comes to mind that Roger just reminded me, we do have an application in here for Living History Farms. they are going to do that new building out there for them. So we do have that application in here as well. And then I would just clarify, Pat, I think it was your question. Cities do generally waive fees on their own projects. Almost everybody's in the same bucket for that. So
Thanks for that clarification, Steve.
So we are waiving fees for our own projects.
That would be
correct.
Okay.
Yep, not almost. Every city that we interviewed with the process of asking questions, what do you do, what do you not do, every single one of them did waive fees only for their own city projects and then obviously state and federal projects.
Thank you. And so what would be the recommendation related to the food pantry and living history farms? Those are probably somewhat significant, at least to them, if not to us.
Yeah, they definitely could be. And that, again, that falls under your prerogative of what you all would like to do there. I do know, let's see here, Living History Farms, the biggest one, let's see. And Roger, I think you're on, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm looking here, their new cultivation center, it would be just over $14,000, $14,160.49.
For their permit?
Correct. It's not been issued, but we have calculated what those fees would be for that new cultivation center, and that would be a $14,000 item. Otherwise, over the years, it's been 30-something here, 50-something there, 70-something there. But this is a major new project that they're embarking on. That's the only other thing that I can think of, that we can think of, that's out there.
And do you have any conversations with us regarding how much their fees, that they should expect in fees already?
The folks from not Living History Farms, but from the food pantry, the architect had made an inquiry about that a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to sound like I'm backtracking a bit, but if those two have applications in already, they may be eligible for a grandfather clause, that they're already in it before official action taken by council would be effective July 1st.
Yeah, I would say Living History Farms is certainly aware that in the past we have waived fees for them. Again, those have been minimal amounts. This is a much bigger amount because of their new building.
Also, remember on Living History Farms, we raised this during the budget process. They are looking for a financial contribution from the city, which we'll have a discussion on future when we get to an audit committee review of a new policy. But, their expectations are, and I believe when we've set aside or identified those monies for a contribution. So again, I don't want to sound like I'm backtracking, but if you have a date effective July 1st, it may be that you will accept the applications that are already in up to that point, and then after July 1st, new applications going in.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I would like to see us pursue that just because I have to assume at this point that they applied with the understanding that they would fall under the previous clause. So I'd prefer to have that.
I think that's a fair assumption. Yep.
I think that'd be the best way to go.
Yep.
Okay.
Agreed.
What about acknowledging this as a part of our contribution? To them.
I think that's something we can consider. I think I would, get from Steve maybe a little bit more defined on the dollar amount, but yeah, I mean, that's, again, the reason why we're recommending a change is that we're actually providing services. And even though, let's assume that the council is agreeable to say that your application's already in play, and so therefore you're kind of grandfathered in before the July 1st date, we can calculate that out and say this is a contribution. Now, the food pantry, you've already made the contribution of the acquisition of the building. The Living History Farms, their number is, I think it was $50,000 or $10,000 a year for a 5-year contribution for their program. That certainly can be incorporated in a final determination what the council wishes to make as far as a direct financial contribution.
I guess maybe something to consider would be I'm just kind of spitballing this, but that our waiving of the permit fees being the first installment of, you know, if we were to do a 5-year grant application. I'm just, you know, throwing that out there for discussion. And maybe it doesn't have to be now, but I would like to have acknowledgement if we do, I mean, even if they fall under this grandfather clause, that we're making a $14,000 contribution more or less, regardless of what we do over 5 years.
I think that can be incorporated in your final determination as to the level of assistance that you want to provide. And even if you decided that it would be in addition to, that acknowledgement to be there is that the value of your contribution as a city is not X, but it's X plus 14,000. And that's just one option. We'll give you options to consider.
All right. Any further discussion? I think we have consensus, sounds like, right?
Thank
All
you,
right.
Mayor.
Thumbs up. Very good. Well, that takes us to the end of our agenda. Is there anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn? If not, we are adjourned. You get a half hour back in your day. So.